Hello and welcome to the Mysteries of History podcast with me, your host, Nick Monk. Each week together we will take a look at a fascinating piece of history. As gruesome, mysterious, unbelievable that these tales may sound, one thing is for sure. These events happened, these people existed, and these places have made their mark on our historical landscape. Be sure to check out the website, themysteriesofhistory.com, where you can access all of the podcasts and show notes. And of course the blog, where we will give you an extra insight into each episode, as well as all sorts of unbelievable historical content. You can also find us on social media, where you can let us know what you think of the podcast episodes, or even suggest a new historical mystery for us to investigate. This week we'd really like to say a big thank you to all of you out there who are supporting the Mysteries of History podcast, and it's really great to see that so many of you have downloaded all of the episodes so far. We're gaining real support on social media, and it's really wonderful to see lots of people reading the blog posts as well, which we think really complement the podcasts quite well. We'd like to give a special thank you to a couple of people in particular. So Mandy Caddick, thank you very much for all of your support on social media, particularly Facebook, where you're liking and sharing our content regularly. This is really helping us to spread the word to other like-minded people who hopefully would enjoy this podcast as much as you appear to be. So yeah, it's really much appreciated, all your support, so thank you very much. On a similar note, thank you to Berry Wright. You sent us a really lovely message saying that you're enjoying the podcast episode so far. So yeah, that's not gone unnoticed at all, and that really keeps us going sometimes when we're trawling through lots and lots of historical documents that can sometimes feel a bit tedious. You also put a request in, which is great. Yeah, we love requests, and to anyone else who is thinking of sending us a request in or might be interested in us talking about a historical or mysterious historical event in history, by all means let us know. Berry sent us a message directly on Facebook, so anything like that, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, that'd be great. But yes, Berry, you are interested in the Battle of Sedgemoor and the Bloody Assizes. Well, it's funny actually, because we were actually planning this episode before you sent the message, and then I read your message. So I hope we've done it justice for you, and enjoy. And last but by no means least, let me thank Katie and Rosie at the Cozy Cup Book Club podcast for giving the Mysteries of History podcast a little mini review on their latest episode. Much appreciated. Thank you very much. You said some really lovely things about what we're doing here, and I think you even described my voice as soothing. So that was great. So I'll definitely take that. But seriously, to all of our listeners, go and check out what Katie and Rosie are doing at the Cozy Cup Book Club. They've got a really good laid-back and easygoing style, very easy to listen to. But they are obviously reviewing lots of different books and lots of different authors. I think they've done a few interviews already with some new and upcoming authors. But what I really like is that they're championing new authors. You know, we all need a bit of a leg up now and again. So, this is something I really support too. So good on you both. It really looks like you're building a really successful podcast. I wish, we at the Mysteries of History wish you all the success. So now let's get back on track and have a look at this week's mysterious historical tale. It has been more than 30 years since the end of the English Civil War. Charles I has been executed in 1649 for treason. His son, the Prince of Wales and the future Charles II, has been forced into exile in France. The people will not tolerate an absolute monarchy any longer. England becomes a republic for 11 years during a period known as the interregnum, meaning a period when normal governance is suspended. In 1651, a 21-year-old Charles II is invited to Scotland to be made king, but he must sign the National Covenant. The Scottish people demand that Charles II upholds Presbyterianism. This is a branch of Protestant Christianity characterised by its form of church government led by representative assemblies of elders called presbyters. Presbyterians hold on to Reformed theology, which emphasises the sovereignty of God in all aspects of life, salvation and creation. This is far removed from the doctrine that Charles I tried to force upon the Scottish people. In particular, they disliked Charles I's attempts to force upon them the English Common Book of Prayer. The book was seen as being forced upon them by the English crown and its bishops without any input from Scottish clergy or the Scottish people. Many Scots, particularly those with Puritan or Presbyterian leanings, found the book's liturgy too ritualistic and similar to the Catholic Mass. The book's language and rituals were seen by some as too close to Catholic practices. We must remember that the hatred and distrust between Protestants and Catholics that existed during the English Civil War is still very much alive. By forcing Charles II to sign this document, the National Covenant, Scotland could be assured that the new king would not impose any religious change and maintain Scotland's religion. So now, as King of Scotland, Charles II sets about invading England, but is finally defeated at the Battle of Worcester by Oliver Cromwell on the 3rd of September 1651. Under the leadership of Oliver Cromwell, who is given the title of Lord Protector by Parliament in 1653, Cromwell and Parliament effectively rule over England, Scotland and Ireland until his death in 1658. This is only for Charles II to be eventually invited back to England to take up the throne once more in 1660, with a restoration of the monarchy. Stability, perhaps? So now let's move forward to February 1685, and King Charles II of England, one of the most flamboyant, charismatic monarchs in British history, has just died of kidney disease. And without a legitimate heir, his brother, James, the Duke of York, inherits the throne and is crowned James II of England, Scotland and Ireland. There is one problem though. James II is a Catholic. Whispers begin to circulate, an undercurrent of distrust builds, and there is even talk of rebellion. The sudden death of Charles II and the appointment of James II, a Catholic, to the English throne, sends shockwaves across the kingdom, but perhaps no one feels it more deeply or sees more opportunity than James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth. Monmouth isn't just anyone, he's Charles II's illegitimate son. The king never acknowledged him as heir, but rumours swirled for years that maybe, just maybe, he'd changed his mind. But as we know now, the crown goes to James II, the Catholic. Many fear a return to popery and absolutism. The question isn't just who should be king, but what kind of England the people want to live in. And Monmouth, from his base in exile in Holland, sees an opportunity. Surely, though, England has seen enough bloodshed, with the English Civil War not even a distant memory. It would appear, though, that people were quick to forget, and what unfolds is a story of ambition, bloodlines and betrayal, of a handsome, dashing duke who tries to claim a crown that wasn't his, and of a state that punishes those who dare to question authority with severity rarely seen before. James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth, is tall, striking and popular with the people, especially the Protestants. He's already led troops in battle and toured the country like a royal rock star. Exiled in the Netherlands, he watches England from across the Channel. And when Charles dies, whispers reach him. People want him to return. Some even claim Charles secretly married Monmouth's mother, making him the legitimate heir. True or not, Monmouth believes it. And so the scene is set for the Monmouth Rebellion, also known as the Pitchfork Rebellion, as many men who joined Monmouth's army were little more than farm labourers, armed with their pitchforks from the fields. The Duke of Monmouth, though, is not alone. he has the support of the Scots, ever keen to rid the throne of a Catholic king. And so in May 1685, the Duke of Argyll set sail from Holland to initiate a rebellion in Scotland. The plan was for Argyll to hold a strong position in Argyllshire, diverting government troops his way, whilst at the same time the Duke of Monmouth would land on the south coast of England and march his way to London to create an uprising. An interesting point to make here is that the Duke of Argyll's army coming from Scotland and the Duke of Monmouth's men who were coming up from the south of England are described in history books as the Whig armies. So the Whigs were a political party in Parliaments of England, Scotland and Ireland between the 1680s and about the 1850s. And the Whigs contested power with their rivals, the Tories, in these governments. And later the Whigs became the Liberal Party when this faction merged with the Peelites and Radicals in the 1850s. Many Whigs left the Liberal Party in 1886 over the issue of Irish Home Rule. This in itself was a movement or campaign, if you like, that campaigned for self-government for Ireland within the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. And this was a dominant political party movement of Irish nationalism from the 1870s all the way to the end of the First World War. So I thought this explanation would just be useful as we gain more understanding about exactly what Argyll and Monmouth's motives were, aside from obviously religious, and in terms of Monmouth to gain the crown. We can understand a little bit here about their political leanings as well. The plan is then set between the Duke of Argyll and the Duke of Monmouth. They almost plan a pincer movement, Argyll coming from the north, and the Duke of Monmouth, when he does land in the UK or England, he will move up from the south with a view of taking London and reclaiming what he sees as his rightful crown. However, things do not quite work out the way they planned. To start with, Argyll is faced with good and then poor weather, and alongside this, the forces of the new King James II were funded by French money, and through a network of spies, James had advanced warning that the invasions were coming, but did not necessarily know where or when. In Scotland, the Highland militia were ordered into Argyll's homeland of Argyllshire. Here they seized the key town of Inveraray and punished Whig supporters. Argyll landed first in the Orkney Isles, where news quickly spread of his invasion. Argyll then moved to sail round the northern coast of Scotland. We'll briefly leave the Duke of Argyll fighting his way down through Scotland and move to the Duke of Monmouth, who has been waiting for his opportune moment to land in the southern coast of England. And it finally arrives. It finally arrives on June the 11th, where the Duke of Monmouth with 80 men finally lands at Lyme Regis, which is on the Dorset coast, and his army grew rapidly. Anti-Catholic sentiment is strong in the West Country, and farmers, tradesmen, apprentices, most of them poorly trained and poorly armed, quickly flock to Monmouth's cause. It's a people's army, but not a professional one. The government militia moved to cut off Lyme Regis from the rest of England, but the Whigs attacked the Dorset militia at Bridport on June the 14th, and then broke the Somerset and Devonshire militia, attempting to block the road to Axminster on June the 15th. Initially, the government of James II had hoped to trap Monmouth at Lyme, but with the local militia defeated, James II sends in seasoned troops under Louis de Duras and John Churchill, the future Duke of Marlborough, with the aim of intercepting Monmouth before he reaches Bristol. The Duke of Monmouth marches all the way to Taunton in Somerset, where his army was remodelled on June the 19th and now numbered around 6,000 men. On the 20th of June, Monmouth was proclaimed king by the magistrates of Taunton. The people of the West Country must have been sure that James II could be defeated, because nothing could be more treasonous than proclaiming another king while the monarch still sits on the throne. As for the Duke of Argyll, things are not going to plan either. He finds himself surrounded but breaks out towards Glasgow, leaving his supplies to be captured. On the night of June the 17th, the Whigs are at Killearn, facing the Earl of Dumbarton with a government force 3 times their size. Although the Whigs capture the crossing here, by sunrise Argyle's army has broken up, with some lost in the hills and others fleeing home. With his army destroyed, Argyle crosses the Clyde and is captured on June the 18th, trying to get to Glasgow. The Monmouth Rebellion in Scotland is effectively over. Monmouth is now on his own, and after his capture Argyle was executed in Edinburgh on June the 30th, 1685. From Taunton the Duke of Monmouth moved to Bridgewater before starting his march east. Monmouth's initial plan was to march to London, but once he reaches Shepton Mallet on June the 23rd, he receives news of the government army marching from London. Monmouth therefore chooses to march on Bristol. However, government troops under the 2nd Earl of Feversham reach Bristol on June 24th with his cavalry and is supported by 3,000 militia, and they fortify the city. Although Monmouth seizes the bridge at Keynsham from a force of militia looking to destroy the crossing, Monmouth and his army are slowed down, and his woes only grow as government cavalry attack Monmouth's rear guard at Keynsham. Monmouth decides to march east to reach Warminster. From here the road to London would be open for an attack on the heart of the monarchy. Feversham moves his army to Bath and is joined by infantry from London and Churchill's brigade. With an army now numbering over 5,000 men, Feversham attacks Monmouth on June 27th at Norton St Philip. But Monmouth's army are resilient and defeat Feversham, but fighting lasts all day, and this prevents Monmouth from reaching Warminster and taking the road to London. Feversham deploys his army to stop Monmouth's advance, and with the supplies running short, the Whig army retires to Bridgewater. It is here in Bridgewater that Monmouth sets about fortifying the town, but only 2 days later, on July the 5th, Feversham arrives in the nearby village of Weston Zoyland, some 5 miles from the Whigs, with an army of 3,600 soldiers and 18 guns. Monmouth is now effectively cornered, but he has an army of 4,000 men, but only 3 guns. The Duke of Monmouth decides that a surprise attack on the government forces is his best option, and the scene is now set for the Battle of Sedgemoor. The Duke of Monmouth eventually led his troops out of Bridgewater about 10 p.m. on the 5th of July 1685 to undertake a nighttime attack on the King's army. They were guided by Richard Godfrey, the servant of a local farmer, along the old Bristol road towards the small village of Bordrip. With their limited cavalry in the vanguard, they turned south along Bradney Lane and Marsh Lane and came to the open moor of the Somerset Levels, with its deep and dangerous ditches, or more locally known as rhines or dykes. The element of surprise was critical for Monmouth's plan to succeed and for him to overwhelm the government forces, the well-trained soldiers of James II. There was a delay while the Rhine was crossed, and the first men across startled a government patrol. A shot was fired and a horseman from the patrol galloped off to report to Feversham. Lord Grey of Wark led the rebel cavalry forward, and they were engaged by the King's regiment of horse, which alerted the rest of the government forces. The superior training of the regular army and their horses enabled them to rout the rebel forces by outflanking them. Monmouth's whole plan is a disaster. Confused by the marshy terrain and betrayed by a local guide, Monmouth's forces are overwhelmed. Casualty numbers are high, particularly for Monmouth and his men. Over 1,000 rebels were killed or wounded, and around 100 royalists suffered casualties. Over 500 of Monmouth's troops were captured and imprisoned in St Mary's Parish Church in the local village of Weston Zoyland, while others were hunted and shot in the ditches where they were hiding. More were hanged from gibbets erected along the roadside. The royalist troops were rewarded, with Feversham being made a Knight of the Garter, Churchill promoted to Major General, and others receiving honours and knighthoods. There was no honours to be bestowed upon one royalist officer, as is described here in the story of Mary Bridge. Mary Bridge was 11 or 12 years old and was living with her family in Weston Zoyland in July 1685. Monmouth has been defeated and a royalist officer has been billeted with them. However, this officer is less than honourable and attempts to assault the mother of Mary Bridge. Mary draws the soldier's sword and kills him by stabbing him in the heart. Mary was tried in front of Colonel Kirk, a royalist commander, but she was acquitted. He was impressed by her brave actions and even gave her the sword to keep, and it was handed down through generations of the family before being given to the Museum of Somerset in Taunton, where it can be viewed on display to this day. Other soldiers, particularly those who had been wounded, received allowances ranging from £5 to £80, as some of the wounded were among the first to be treated at the newly opened Royal Hospital in Chelsea. The injuries sustained from the men fighting at the Battle of Sedgemoor would have ranged from concussions all the way through to large gash and slash marks from swords, blunt force trauma injuries from being hit with implements or even crushed by horses. But this was an age of cannon fire as well, and some of the injuries were simply brutal. Men had very little chance of surviving once infection set in. If shot by a musket ball, a battlefield surgeon would have had very little time, as they tried to remove the lead shot from the victim. If this lead shot was not removed, it was almost certain death for the poor soul, as infection would have spread quickly with no means of stopping it. The rebellion here at the Battle of Sedgemoor was decisively crushed, and is indeed regarded by some as the last major battle on British soil. The Duke of Monmouth, however, manages to escape this bloody battlefield, and disguised as a peasant, he aims to make his way to Christchurch in Dorset. The Duke is said to have had nothing to eat since the battle, and has just been collecting peas from local fields as and where he could find them. Monmouth's luck eventually runs out though, as a local person gives him up as he is found hiding in a ditch amongst the heather. The Duke of Monmouth is dragged to the Tower of London. Pleading for mercy, he writes desperately to King James, begging for his life, even offering to convert to Catholicism. James doesn't blink though. And so a man once fighting for the crown of England finds himself walking to Tower Hill on July the 15th, 1685, where he is to be beheaded. But the executioner botches the job. 5 strikes before his head comes off. The crowd watches in utmost horror. But King James II is not done. What follows is one of the bloodiest crackdowns in English history, the Bloody Assizes. King James II has not forgotten the audacity of the rebels. How dare they challenge his crown? He will make an example of them. And the brutality that is to unfold shortly shocks the nation. In the months after the Battle of Sedgemoor, King James II inflicted a harsh penalty on those that had rebelled. Hundreds of men stood trial, not in fair courts, but in brutal displays of royal vengeance. The judges didn't just dispense justice, they made an example. This is the story of the Bloody Assizes. We will examine how a courtroom became an instrument of terror, and how a single man earned the nickname the Hanging Judge. When James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth, raised his banner against King James II, he was hailed by many as a Protestant hero. But after his ragtag army, made of labourers and peasants, was crushed at the Battle of Sedgemoor, hope turned to fear. The Duke of Monmouth has been dealt with, he has been executed, but the king wanted more than a victory, he wanted retribution. The rebellion had threatened his rule, and somebody had to pay. So he sent Judge George Jeffreys and a panel of commissioners on a circuit across the West Country, with a task to root out the rebels and punish them harshly. Thus began the Bloody Assizes. George Jeffreys wasn't your average judge. Brilliant, yes, but ruthless, arrogant, and with a taste for theatrics in court. At just 40 years of age, he'd risen rapidly through the legal ranks. known as much for his sharp tongue as his sharp mind. He arrived in the West Country with a clear message from the Crown: show no mercy. Between August and September 1685, Jeffreys presided over trials in towns like Winchester, Taunton, Dorchester, Exeter and Wells. In each he delivered sentence after sentence with a chilling blend of sarcasm and fury. Historians estimate over 1,400 prisoners were tried during the assizes. Picture a cramped courthouse filled with terrified men, many of them farmers, weavers, even teenagers, brought in chains. Few had legal representation. Most had already confessed, whether through fear, confusion, or torture. Jeffreys wasn't interested in nuance. He called the accused barbarous rebels and mocked their pleas. The punishments? Gruesome. Around 320 of the accused were sentenced to death, many to be hanged, drawn and quartered. A brutal process whereby the prisoner was hanged until nearly dead and then cut down and then had their insides drawn out of them while still alive, and finally, if they had not passed out or died already, the individual was cut into 4 pieces and the head chopped off. Heads were stuck on pikes and body parts nailed to town gates as a warning. In fact, there's an old saying in Somerset that during this period there wasn't a crossroads in the county that didn't have a body part of a rebel on display. This was the clearest warning possible to the community that they daren't ever try and rebel against the crown again, because this is what would happen to you if you did. Other rebels, over 800 or so, were sentenced to transportation. Essentially, they were sold into slavery in the West Indies. Their families never saw them again. And then there were the women. One famous case was that of Alice Lyle, a 71-year-old widow who offered shelter to 2 fugitives. For this act of kindness, Jeffreys condemned her to death. She was beheaded in Winchester, the last woman ever executed by judicial order in England in that manner. Even King James II reportedly had doubts about that one. King James II believed fear would secure loyalty, but the bloody assizes had the opposite effect. Public horror grew. Even loyal subjects were uneasy at the scale of the executions and the savagery of the trials. Jeffreys returned to London a hated and feared man, but King James II made him Lord Chancellor, his highest legal officer. It was seen as a reward for his loyalty. But fate turned quickly. 3 years later, James II was overthrown in the Glorious Revolution. William of Orange took the throne, and Jeffreys tried to flee, disguised as a sailor. He was recognised in a pub by someone who remembered his face from the assizes. A mob surrounded him, shouting, "We've got the devil." He was thrown into the Tower of London, where he died in 1689, sick, broken, and still feared. The bloody assizes are remembered as one of the darkest chapters in English legal history. They weren't about justice, they were just about revenge, a warning from a paranoid king to anyone who dared resist. Judge Jeffreys' name became a byword for tyranny. His story reminds us that when the law is used to silence, not protect, it becomes a weapon. And yet out of this bloodshed came change. Public revulsion at the assizes helped fuel the Glorious Revolution, which led to a new Bill of Rights and limits on monarchical power. So yes, justice was twisted, but history remembers.
So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about the Battle of Sedgemoor and the Monmouth Rebellion, I've got a few recommendations for you. If you ever find yourself in Somerset, by all means go and visit the battle site. The Battle of Sedgemoor site is in the village of Weston Zoyland, or just outside the village, where there's a small monument and a bit of information. But to be honest, all you'll see now is a more flat level land on the Somerset levels. Looks rather peaceful, to be honest, but just picture yourself back there on the 6th of July 1685, and it was a very, very different place. You can also, while you're there in the village of Weston Zoyland, walk to the church where over 500 prisoners and the injured were kept, and also the village pub, which is very, very old and contemporary with the battle itself, so that's got a lot of information in there too. But yeah, really fascinating village, and obviously with such history associated with it, it's pretty amazing. Another great place to visit while you're in Somerset is the Museum of Somerset, which is in the county town of Taunton. Now this museum's is really incredible because it's actually free to get into, which is, well, you'll see when you get there, it's just got so much stuff on offer, so many things to look at and see. But if you go to the first floor of the museum, there's a whole room dedicated to the Monmouth Rebellion and the Bloody Assizes. So you'll gain a lot of information there, see a lot of pictorial information, and you can also see the sword that we talk about earlier on in the podcast. And finally, I just want to tell you a few ghost stories. No story about a 17th century battle site would be complete without a few ghost stories. There are a few really prominent ones and, well, famous ones to the area that I thought I'd share with you. The first ghost is that of the Duke of Monmouth, who often appears near or on the battlefield, particularly around the anniversary of the battle, July the 6th. He's said to be seen on horseback, sometimes waving as if to a cheering crowd, possibly reliving happier times before his defeat. And there's one quite famous account involving the Duke of Monmouth's ghost, and that is in the 1920s, there was a chap driving his car down one of the lanes very near to the battle site, and he sees a horseman approaching him. Now, in the 1920s, seeing a person on horseback would have not been completely unusual, but what scared this car driver particularly was that as the man on horseback was approaching him, he noticed two things. Firstly, he noticed that the horse was actually riding about a foot above the ground, which is not normal, shall we say, and also that the gentleman was dressed in 17th century clothing. So this gentleman thinks that he may have seen the Duke of Monmouth. Another really famous ghost story from the battle site, so this is actually from the site of the Battle of Sedgemoor, so this is a site you can actually go and visit yourself. And this is quite a poignant story, and this involves a young woman who drowned herself in despair after witnessing the execution of her lover, who was promised to be spared if he could outrun his captors. Now, what the royalist troops actually did is they said to this, the rebel, if you like, if you can outrun this soldier on horseback, we'll spare your life. So the chap is alleged to have set off running and ran quite far away, thinking he was escaping, and then of course the soldier on horseback catches up with him and slashes him down with his sword, killing him in the process. So I've heard that the ghost of the young woman is said to be heard singing softly in and around the battle site, and sometimes people even see the young woman in question. Another story at the battle site is reported from local farmers who report hearing ghostly cries of "come on over" echoing across the fields, and this is believed to be cries of Monmouth's men urging others to join the battle as they were cut down by musket fire. Again, galloping horsemen are said to be ghosts of Monmouth's cavalry, and these have been reported racing across the fields. And at St Mary's Church in Weston Zoyland, where so many troops or rebels were kept hostage, a shadowy figure is sometimes seen near a pew in the church itself, where Monmouth is said to have surveyed the enemy camp before the battle. Now, the last ghost story I'm going to tell you is actually a story that was told to me, and this is alleged to have taken place actually in the village I grew up in Somerset, which is about 20 minutes from the Battle of Sedgemoor site, or 20 minutes from Western Zoyland. Now, in this story was actually told to me by an ex-RAF pilot. He's very high up in the military, actually, a squadron leader. Now, this chap said that he was asleep on the night of the 6th of July. He didn't actually know the 6th of July had any relevance, but he was asleep, he said, and he was awoken very suddenly and could hear marching and the jangling of armour and perhaps even pitchforks outside his house. His house is actually on a tracked route that is quite likely to have been a route that the peasant army of Monmouth would have taken to and from the battle. So that's quite an interesting point. But yeah, this chap said he was awoken by lots of marching, stomping feet and the clanging of armour and perhaps weaponry. And he knew nothing particularly about the Battle of Sedgemoor or the Monmouth Rebellion, so he contacted the local museum, who told him that, yes, on the 6th of July, the Battle of Sedgemoor happened. So he is adamant, or was adamant at the time, that he heard what he heard and he was woken up from a sleep. Now, knowing this chap as I do, this chap is a very straight person, is not very sort of akin to making things up. So I included it in this podcast because I think it's quite an incredible story. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, it's pretty fascinating, at least. Did this man in question hear the dead soldiers of the rebel army marching back to their loved ones?
Thanks for listening, and be sure to check out our blog at themysteriesofhistory.com and social media outlets where we'll post extra info and images for each episode. So until next week, stay curious. The mysteries of history remain.